The cold iron chains bit into her wrists as Sarah was dragged through the massive wooden doors of the Black Moon Pack's territory. 20 years had passed, but she recognized every stone, every tree, every shadow of this place. The memories crashed over her like violent waves. A small girl with wild curls and fearless eyes, running through these same forests, laughing without a care in the world. But that girl was gone now. The guards flanking her were silent, their faces carved from stone as they pulled her forward. Her bare feet scraped against the rough ground, leaving faint traces of blood on the earth she once called home. The chains were heavy, enchanted with wolfsbane-infused metal that burned against her skin and suppressed the wolf within her. Every step was agony, but Sarah refused to show weakness. She had learned long ago that showing weakness meant death. The great hall loomed before her, its towering entrance flanked by torches that cast dancing shadows across the stone walls. This was where the pack gathered, where justice was served, where the Alpha held court. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but not from fear. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't quite name but had carried with her for 2 decades. As the doors swung open, the noise of the assembled pack hit her like a physical force. Hundreds of werewolves filled the hall, their eyes glowing in the dim light, their whispers creating a symphony of judgment and curiosity. They parted as she was led through, creating a pathway to the raised platform at the far end of the hall. And there he sat, Damien Blackmoon, the Alpha, the most powerful werewolf in the Northern Territories, possibly in all the lands. His presence dominated the room even in stillness. He sat on a throne carved from a single massive oak, his posture relaxed but radiating an authority that made even the strongest wolves bow their heads. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was both devastatingly handsome and terrifyingly cold. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes, those eyes that glowed with an otherworldly amber light. Those were the eyes Sarah remembered from her childhood, the eyes she had looked into 20 years ago when she was just 7 years old, fearless and foolish, and he was already the newly crowned Alpha at 25. The guards forced her to her knees before the platform. The chains rattled, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent hall. Every eye was on her, but Sarah only looked at him. Damien's expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Sarah Winters. His voice boomed through the hall, deep and commanding, sending shivers down her spine. You stand accused of treason against the Black Moon Pack, of consorting with our enemies, of betraying your own kind. How do you answer these charges? Sarah's throat was dry, but she forced herself to speak, her voice steady despite everything. I answered that truth is often stranger than fiction, Alpha Damien, and that not everything is as it appears. A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to the Alpha like that, no one dared. But Sarah wasn't like everyone else. She had never been. Damien leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. You have courage, I'll grant you that, the same reckless courage you had as a child. The memory flashed between them, unspoken but understood. 20 years ago, little Sarah had wandered too far into the forest during the full moon festival. She had stumbled upon the Alpha ceremony, where young Damien was being crowned. Children were forbidden from attending, but Sarah had never been good at following rules. She had watched from behind a tree as the former Alpha placed the ceremonial crown upon Damien's head, as the pack howled their acceptance. And when the ceremony ended, when the crowd dispersed, Sarah had done something unthinkable. She had walked right up to the new Alpha, looked up at him with her big hazel eyes, and declared, "You're very tall and scary, but I'm not afraid of you. One day, when I grow up, I'm going to be your queen." The pack members who had overheard had been shocked into silence. Speaking to an Alpha without being addressed was forbidden. Making such a bold, presumptuous claim was beyond insulting. It was suicidal. Everyone had expected Damien to punish the child, to at least have her removed and her parents disciplined. But Damien had done something unexpected. He had knelt down to her level, studied her face with those penetrating amber eyes, and smiled, a rare, genuine smile that few ever saw. "Is that so, little one?" he had asked. "And what makes you think you could be a queen?" "Because I'm brave and smart and I don't give up," Sarah had answered with absolute confidence. "And because you look like you need someone who isn't afraid of you." The alpha had laughed then, a sound like rolling thunder. He had gently touched her wild curls and said, "Perhaps you're right, little one. Perhaps you're right. Very well, I'll remember your promise. But first, you must grow strong. Come find me in 20 years, and we'll see if you still have that fire in your eyes." It had been a game, a moment of indulgence with an amusing child. No one had taken it seriously. Sarah's parents had been mortified, apologizing profusely, but Damien had waved them away, seeming more entertained than offended. 3 months later, Sarah and her parents had left the territory. Her father had accepted a position with another pack, and they had moved far away. Sarah had thought about that moment often over the years, about the alpha who had been kind to a silly little girl with big dreams. And now, here she was, exactly 20 years later, but not in the way either of them had imagined. "I remember what you said," Damien spoke again, his voice cutting through her memories. "That day in the forest, you were so small, so fierce. I wondered what became of you." "Life took me far from here," Sarah replied, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "And life has brought me back in chains." "You were found in the territory of the Shadowfang Pack," Damien stated, his voice hardening. "Our greatest enemies. You were living among them, fighting alongside them. That is the definition of treason." "I was surviving," Sarah countered, lifting her chin defiantly. "After my parents were killed in a rogue attack 5 years ago, I had nowhere to go. The Shadowfang took me in when no one else would. You could have come home. You could have come here. This hasn't been my home for 20 years. I didn't think I'd be welcomed back. So instead, you chose to side with those who seek to destroy us?" Damien's voice was cold now, the warmth completely gone. "I sided with those who offered me shelter when I was alone and afraid," Sarah shot back. "I never fought against Black Moon. I never raised a weapon against your people. I simply existed in a territory that happened to be at odds with yours." "The Shadowfang Alpha has been planning an attack on our territory," Damien said, rising from his throne. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, his presence overwhelming as he descended the steps toward her. He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her kneeling form. "You were found with maps of our territory, Sarah. Maps with notations in your handwriting. How do you explain that?" Sarah's heart sank. The maps. She had forgotten about the maps. But the explanation was complicated, and she wasn't sure anyone would believe her. "I can explain," she began, but Damien raised his hand, silencing her. "You'll have your chance to speak, but first, there's something you should know." He turned to address the assembled pack. "The penalty for treason is death. However, there is an ancient law, one that hasn't been invoked in over a century. The accused has the right to invoke the trial of truth, a 3-part challenge that tests not just strength, but loyalty, wisdom, and heart. If she succeeds in all 3 trials, her innocence is proven, and all charges are dropped. If she fails even one, the death sentence is carried out immediately." He looked back down at Sarah, and for just a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern? Curiosity? She couldn't be sure. "Do you invoke the trial of truth, Sarah Winters?" Sarah's mind raced. She knew about the trial of truth from old stories. It was designed to be nearly impossible to complete. Most who attempted it died in the first trial. But it was her only chance. Death was certain if she didn't try. At least this way, she had a sliver of hope. "I invoke the trial of truth," she declared, her voice ringing clear and strong through the hall. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even Damien seemed surprised, though he hid it quickly behind his alpha mask. "So be it," he declared. The trials will begin at dawn. Until then, you will be held in the detention cells. Guards, take her away." As they dragged her back through the hall, Sarah caught Damien's eyes one last time. There was something in his gaze she couldn't read, something that made her wonder if perhaps he wasn't as convinced of her guilt as he pretended to be. The cell they threw her into was cold and damp, carved directly into the mountain stone beneath the great hall. The chains remained on her wrists, burning with the wolfsbane that kept her wolf suppressed. Sarah slumped against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She had come back, not to claim a throne as she had so confidently predicted as a child, but as a prisoner accused of the worst crime imaginable. The irony wasn't lost on her. But Sarah hadn't survived the last 20 years by giving up. She had survived loss, pain, betrayal, and loneliness. She would survive this too. As the hours passed and dawn approached, Sarah closed her eyes and thought about that little girl who had fearlessly approached an alpha and declared her intentions. That girl was still inside her somewhere, buried beneath layers of trauma and survival instinct. Tomorrow, she would need to find that girl again. She would need every ounce of courage, every bit of strength, every drop of determination she possessed. Because tomorrow, she would face the trial of truth. And failure meant death. But perhaps, just perhaps, success meant something even more dangerous, proving to Damien Blackmoon that the little girl who promised to be his queen had grown into a woman who could actually fulfill that promise. The question was, did she still want to? And more importantly, 20 years later, would he? As the first light of dawn began to filter through the small window high in her cell, Sarah heard footsteps approaching. The trials were about to begin, and with them, her chance to prove her innocence, reclaim her honor, and perhaps discover what fate really had in store for her. The little girl had made a promise 20 years ago. Now, the woman would keep it, one way or another. The door to her cell opened, flooding the space with torchlight. Damien himself stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he said simply. "The first trial awaits. I should warn you, many have tried the trial of truth. None have succeeded in the last 100 years." Sarah rose to her feet, ignoring the pain of the chains, and looked him straight in the eye. "Then I suppose I'll be the first." Something flickered across Damien's face. Respect, perhaps, or admiration. "We'll see, little one, we'll see." And as they walked toward whatever awaited her, Sarah couldn't help but think that perhaps fate had a twisted sense of humor. She had promised to be his queen. She just never imagined the path would lead through fire, blood, and chains. But then again, nothing worth having ever came easy. The trials awaited, her destiny awaited, and somewhere deep inside, her wolf stirred, ready to fight for survival, for truth, and perhaps for something she had long thought impossible, a place to truly belong. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story. If you enjoyed Sarah's journey and want to see how the trials unfold, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription means everything to us and helps us bring you more emotional and thrilling stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss what happens next. Will Sarah survive the trials? Will she prove her innocence? Will that childhood promise become reality? Subscribe now to find out, and we'll see you in the next story.